Good evening.
Good evening.
I hereby call this meeting of the Public Safety Committee to order. Joining us today, I'd like to thank all of our city staff for coming out. Our city staff are led by our city manager, Mr. Lee Garrity. We have members of the legal team led by our city attorney, Angela Carmen. Also, I see some representatives from the fire department led by Chief Farmer, and the police department representative today seems to be Assistant Chief Weaver. So thank you all for being here today. Members of the committee, are there any items that should be pulled for consideration on the consent agenda? If not, I would entertain a motion.
Move for approval.
Second.
It's been motioned and properly second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. That is unanimous. Item G1, please.
Discussion of ordinance amending Chapter 42 of the City Code entitled Motor Vehicles and Traffic.
Members of the committee, I'm going to pitch this to Attorney Carmen to give us some highlights, but first I want to say that I was approached by a private citizen who was interested in creating a unique small business opportunity that would create jobs, a minimal amount of jobs, and ultimately slightly improve on the tax base. This would be a golf cart business that would transport citizens engaging in downtown life and downtown entertainment from one venue or location to the other. In order for this to happen, it's my understanding that we have to regulate how we allow golf courses to operate and where we allow golf courses to operate in the city of Winston-Salem. In 2009, the General Assembly gave local municipalities the ability to regulate golf carts in cities and towns, and I believe that it's a good idea for us to finally sink in and regulate how things are done in our city, and it may often offer us some opportunity. There are three elements that I want to touch very briefly. Under the proposed ordinance, the golf cart operators under this ordinance would have to have a valid driver's license. They would have to have financial responsibility, meaning as far as insurance coverage and liability coverage is concerned. And also, any golf cart operators would have to have proper inspections and permits, and that will be done through our city staff and our law enforcement department. With that being said, I'll turn it over to Attorney Carmen to give us some highlights and details of the proposed ordinance.
Thank you, Councilmember Taylor. The draft ordinance, as mentioned in the item, is for discussion only, but it limits operation of golf carts to the central business district and on streets where the speed limit does not exceed 35 miles per hour, consistent with the statute. And by definition, a golf cart is defined as a vehicle designed and manufactured for operation on a golf course for sporting and recreational use, and that is not capable of exceeding speeds of 20 miles per hour. And as Councilmember Taylor mentioned, the person operating the golf cart has to have a valid driver's license issued by the state of North Carolina or another state. The golf cart has to meet certain safety requirements, including 2 operating headlights and 2 operating tail lights visible from a distance of 500 feet, rear vision mirror, and a rear triangle reflector, 4 operating directional turn blinkers, 2 on each side of the front and the rear of the cart, and seat belts for all passengers. They have to obtain a permit or sticker annually and have the cart inspected annually. Also, the operator must obey all traffic laws, both city and state, and stay to the far right of the travel portion of the road and yield the right-of-way to vehicles and pedestrians. And as I said, comply with all traffic regulations, including those pertaining to stopping, standing, and parking. There are other golf cart ordinances in other communities like the town of Bermuda Run, Pine Knoll Shores, and Morganton, just to name a few. So that's basically an overview.
Thank you, Madam City Attorney. And just to point out, if you look at page 5 on your agenda books, there are some vehicles that would be disqualified under the proposed ordinances, and those would be all-terrain vehicles, 4-wheel utility vehicles, go-karts, and other similar utility vehicles. So overall, I believe this is a decent plan to capitalize on the leeway the General Assembly has handed down to our local municipality. So at this time, are there any questions or concerns for city staff? Councilmember Light.
This is just out of my ignorance about this. The only golf carts I know about are used as gardening carts in Salem, but How much room is there to seat people in them? The ones I know is just the driver and one other seat.
But from my limited knowledge of golf carts, there are several different. Now, I see Councilmember Adams is here. I think there are golf carts where they can transport 2. They have golf carts that can transport 4 or 5. But according to the ordinance, there will only be allowed as many seats as there are for passengers in the golf cart. So, Councilmember Adams, you wanted to touch on that. I know you are an avid golfer.
For which there are seatbelts.
Yeah.
With seatbelts, of course.
Yeah, I was going to ask, are they going to have seat belts? Unlike, thank you, Chair Taylor. On the golf course, they don't require that. But it requires a certain level of responsibility when you drive a golf cart. Golf carts can have as many as 3 seats. I've even seen them with 4 seats, 4 rows, yes. And as Councilmember Taylor said, you can seat as many as 7 people with 1 beside the driver. You never have 3 wherever the driver is. It's always 1. And we might want to put that in here if it's not already in here. I think this is a great idea for us people that go to golf courses and golf resorts. Golf carts is the most popular form of transportation. Cars is not it anymore when you go to resort areas because of the gas and everything. But I think it's a great idea.
And just to touch that really quick before I go around, I believe that this will be limited to the central business district, and I see her shaking her head.
Yeah.
We wanted to get some clarity on that. And I know that I frequent downtown on a regular basis, and if you want to go from Trade Street to Burke Street, sometimes it's difficult to do that on foot. So this could be an innovative way for a small business to get their foot in the door, and also to beef up some of the things that are going on downtown. Did I see some hands over here? Then I'll come to Councilmember Montgomery.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem.
I was going to say, Mr. Chairman, if anyone wants to start a legitimate business and can branch out, we can commend them because we do need it. And downtown, you have some people who even get off of park a certain place. They could use that also in that central area. But in these assisted living, they're using them every day. It comes along with some of the housing in the assisted living. Also, if you go to Winston-Salem State, we get off of the bus and they take us back and forth on the golf course. But I wanted to ask a question about something. The people who have these like bicycles, what you call those?
Rickshaw.
Rickshaw. Pedicabs.
Okay. Oh, pedicabs. Mm-hmm. Do we have any of those operating in Winston-Salem right now?
Mr.
Anybody
Turner?
know?
I don't think there are any operating. I know we were approached by someone, but I don't think they actually carried their plan to operation.
But they were using them during the festival or something. They were using them. How were they able to use them without?
I think they had a temporary permit just for during the festival.
Temporary. Okay. Well, I don't see anything wrong with economic development and people starting businesses as long as we have the guidelines like they need to be and there not be misunderstandings.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Councilmember McIntosh, then Councilmember Montgomery, forgive me.
First, I think anything we can do to reduce the number of cars that we have in our downtown core, the better off we are. I do have a bit of concern. There's going to be both business for-profit operation, but also private citizens can have these. So we're not limiting this to commercial activity. I guess I have a little bit of heartburn about just the aesthetics of these. I know that looking around town at our cab fleets, sometimes they are not the best representation of Winston-Salem's decor. So I would like to see some method, at least on the commercial side, of being able to review that in terms of aesthetics. Maybe that's something that falls into the bid group. But I do think that if they're going to be hauling people around downtown from the convention center to the arts district, that we need to be very conscious about how those things look and operate.
I think that's a wonderful point. And just to be clear, there is a permit process that's outlined on page 5, and it moves over to page 6. Madam City Attorney, are we able to regulate how those golf carts look based on the permit process?
That's one of the items I will look at a little bit more closely and get back with you.
So you'll bring that back. We'll hold this in committee. It's just for discussion, but you will bring that back.
Right, and I wanted to make one other point in terms of the passengers. It does say on page 4, that no passengers shall be carried on the part of the golf cart designed to carry golf bags.
Okay, great.
But I'll look at the aesthetics issue.
Councilmember Montgomery.
in reference to the areas where it's limited in terms of where you can actually have it in the central business district, I think it's good in terms of we're confining where it is, because I don't think you're driving down Stratford Road, I don't think you want to dodge a golf cart. But still looking at downtown per se and limiting to the central business district, in my opinion, kind of constrains it a little bit. And I know we want to keep it into areas where we're not seeing these major areas, but in my opinion, that doesn't include the Innovation Quarter. That doesn't include some other areas where I think you could possibly get a benefit from looking at being able to have this service. And so that'd be something that I
have some maps that might be helpful in terms of the central business district, but I can certainly look at whether or not we need to expand it.
Yeah, and Attorney Carmen, you can make sure we all get maps. And,
Okay.
One of my favorite terms in politics is pilot program. And I think, it's good to just do something small, evaluate it, determine how it works, and then we can make adjustments accordingly. But Councilman Montgomery, I think that's a valid point. And, Madam, you'll make sure we all get copies of that map. Councilman Bessie.
Thank you. I think this is a reasonable concept. I have some specific questions about applicability of certain laws. I was relieved to see the seatbelt specific in there. Is the generally applicable requirement that you have the seatbelt buckled going to apply automatically to golf cart operation?
We can certainly add that.
You wanna
It's
add
not
that?
clear that you have to have both.
And the especially in the case of a commercial operation, it ought to be an obligation of the operator to ensure that the passengers are buckled in and come back on them if not. What about open container laws?
Those apply, so you cannot have a container in the, and that's actually in the ordinance draft.
I'm like, what good is it?
But they do apply.
Okay.
Look at E on page 4. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, it doesn't specifically mention open container, but by implication, yes.
Which one are you talking about?
Can we add that caveat?
Yeah. Trying to think whether there was something else. That's what I can remember for the moment. Thank you.
And there was one more question, and I'll come back to you if you remember anything additionally. But the open container laws are for the driver and for the passengers as well. Right, and we'll make sure we add that language as well. Councilman Burke.
I want to ask a question. How many people, for instance, if someone wants to do this, do you just own one, or can you start having buying them and letting other folks work for you? I need to know about that. Yeah, because see, with the cabs, that's when we got into the problem trying to have so many cabs, and cabs just sitting not being used. So we need to have some type of.
Councilman Light, then we'll come around to Councilman Bessie.
Is there going to be regulation of fees charged?
Yes, ma'am.
Did I miss that?
Under item D, inspection by the police department is $25 annually.
No, I'm talking about how much people pay to ride on these.
Yeah, what's the cost?
From my understanding, and the petitioner is here, from my understanding that there will not be a fee charged in order to ride the golf cart, but monies may be generated through advertisement on the golf carts. So this would be specifically just a service to anybody who wants to get on, to drive from one point to the other point. But they will be able to make money on the back end by advertising with downtown businesses or businesses in the city. But we can't regulate that. But according to the petitioner, I believe that is what he is proposing. I believe Councilmember Bessie, then Councilmember Adams.
I know that the ordinance drafted specifically prohibits parking and putting them on the sidewalk, travel. Where do they park?
Parking spot, just like a vehicle.
Okay. And would they be regulated? Well, of course, in the evening, you don't have time limits on downtown street spaces. But I assume that they would be regulated just as a motor vehicle in terms of the, putting the quarter in, the matter of time? Yeah, okay.
Same stopping, parking, all the rules that we have in the ordinance that applies to vehicles will apply.
Thank you.
And we definitely encourage them to use our city parking decks. Councilmember Adams.
Yes, when you were saying that the petitioner would do it for free versus, and
for tips.
the tips, but the advertising on the golf cart, not much to advertise small spaces. But what if others came forward and they wanted to charge? Would they be able to do that?
I don't have an answer, but when staff comes back to this committee to report, I imagine that is another detail that we will have to hammer out. I thought that's a good thought. And I guess we'll take a look at that when it comes back to committee, and our city manager is nodding his head.
Okay.
And we full well understand there are some things that we have to hammer out with this, but ultimately, I think we all agree it's a good idea, but we have to figure out how we can come to a general consensus on how to move forward. Another item that I believe that must be discussed is whether or not we want to look at, gas golf carts or electric golf carts. After speaking to the petitioner, I believe that the state pushes for electric golf carts. However, they leave it up to local municipalities to make that decision. I think the petitioner is hoping that we will allow gas golf carts, because the last thing that you want to do is be going up a city street and you run out of electricity, and then you're pushing the cart and so on and so forth. So that may be another item we have to hammer out when it comes back to committee. Are there any other questions or concerns about this particular ordinance? And I see that there are a couple of people who have signed up to speak, and if it's okay with the committee, we'll have some public input. I see Dan Dwight has signed up. If you'd like to speak, take a few minutes if you'll give your name and address for the record.
My name's Daniel Dwight, 500 Martha Court, Kernersville, 27284. I'm a big supporter of downtown. I mean, my family and I are down a couple nights a week. But I do have some concerns that I'd like the committee to look at why it's in committee. And the first one is, from the draft, is the police involvement. I mean, the police officers and department are very, very busy. To have them be the ones to issue permits and all that, I just think that's wrong. We've got a department with a taxi inspector. I mean, why doesn't it fall under that department? I just think that should be considered. I think you need to look at a fee schedule. Maybe it's not for fee now, but I see it coming, and I think you've got to be prepared for backlash from the taxi companies. I mean, if you got taxis charging and somebody coming in taking their business for free, I just think you need to be prepared for that. I know there's stipulation for seatbelts, and it says about children being seated, but from a safety point of view, I mean, taxi cabs have to have car seats. If you've got children in a golf cart with just a seatbelt, they're liable to some serious injuries. I know they're limited to 20 miles per hour, but you take a car at 35 hitting a golf cart head on, that child needs to be properly secured. I guess I got a question: where are these going to be parked? Is it a business that somebody's going to haul in a trailer on the weekends and unload them and make a mess? They're going to pull up on Cherry Street and unload 10 golf carts and tie up traffic. That, I think, needs to be looked at. Staying to the right, that's still tough to pass. I mean, it don't matter if you're trying to pass today a jogger or bicyclist or the horse and buggy. I mean, if you've got a lot of these on the street and you want to get past them, it can be difficult. You know, as being a person that comes downtown, the streets are already tough to navigate. You've got runners, bicycles. I have seen the bicycle rickshaw, you know, downtown. You've got the horse and buggies. You got the Segway people running around, skateboards, and mopeds galore. I mean, those mopeds are all over, and I know the state allows it, but you know, they're not paying anything to be on the streets, and they're another point of congestion. I mean, they tie you up. They go slow. You can't get around them, and you know, I just think the committee needs to look at those issues, you know, before going forward. I think the big thing's going to be the competition with taxis, and I think the city needs to set a fee structure if this is going to be a for-hire business.
Mr. Dwight, all valid points. We'll continue to, and this is going to stay in committee. It's just for discussion.
No, it's just in committee.
And we'll look at how we can coexist. We'll look at the parking. I think you brought up an excellent point about the child safety seats being secured, but according to what I'm reading here, that all state and local municipal laws must be followed, and that will be included in that as well. Another valid point about the fee schedule and how we look at inspections, and we'll also leave that in committee and evaluate all of those concepts. So we thank you for taking time to speak to us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Mr. Thiel, if you'll give your name and address for the record, please.
Good afternoon. Jason Thiel, 305 West 4th Street, Suite 2E, here in Winston-Salem, 27101, and I work as the president of the Downtown Winston-Salem Partnership. So I really thought this was, all of the comments here today have been really well thought out, as you guys normally do, and I just wanted to share just a couple of other thoughts as you're discussing this. Golf carts, I was talking to my colleague in Wilmington, and it was something that they enjoyed. The operator was able to make enough money to really pay his employees. He had about 2 or 3 carts. I may have this wrong. I was talking to him today. But it really wasn't enough money to raise the capital to keep the carts maintained. And I think that would really be that's just one operator in one city. It may be a completely different case here. So I think one of the things that I would echo Councilmember McIntosh's comments about the aesthetics. I would look at the idea of a golf cart as a welcome business downtown, and I think Councilmember Burke said it best, the entrepreneur, we want to encourage that. But we've also worked very hard to try to make sure that things also look nice. And we want to make sure that these carts put forth our best effort. We've worked very hard, and I think each operator likely will do that. It may be likely that some people won't get into a cart that doesn't look safe or clean. That very well may be. But we have to assume that if we just go ahead and open the door all the way, that the possibility is that there might be somebody who just brings a recycled golf cart from 20 years of service on a municipal golf course and is just riding it down the street, and it just doesn't look very good. I don't want that. I also wouldn't want to have an unlimited amount of text and advertising on the golf cart either. So those are just two things that, although I'm in favor of advertising on the cart, I think there's a balance, and I think that's hopefully where the discussion would go towards. Finally, some of the things that come up, I do a lot of events downtown. When we do exhibition show permits, we need to make sure that the golf carts are excluded from that boundary unless the operator wants them there. I've had to shoo away the Segway people, not recently, but in the past. The recent groups of Segway operators have been very respectful in that regard, so that's just one other thing to keep in mind. So finally, I know I might have already said that, when they drop off and pick up, It's very important. Our police are very busy, and we want people to come downtown and have a good time. But we also don't want to give the impression that this is just a wild affair, that they shouldn't be stopping in the middle of the street and picking up fares, if that's the proper word, in the middle of a street. That should be something where they're cited immediately for that. It just doesn't provide the right environment in my mind. People should have a good time, and they should be able to get a golf cart from point A to point B, but it shouldn't be the mentality of like a free-for-all in that kind of environment. So, thank you.
So is it, before you leave, Mr. Thiel, is it your suggestion that we have some type of drop-off and pick-up locations?
I think that's
throughout the city?
probably well established in the state law. It's just a matter of, and I talked to Angela Carmen, the city's attorney, about that, and we got into that detail, and it does require them to observe all existing traffic laws, just like any car. And so really a city cab shouldn't be doing that either, and normally they don't. I haven't seen them doing that a lot. They may drop off and that kind of stuff, but I just want to make sure that we establish that and just keep it in the proper perspective of the law, mostly for safety.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who wishes to be heard?
Mr. Taylor, could I make one more comment?
Members of the committee?
Yes, one more.
Please give your name and address again for the record.
Dan Dwight, 500 Martha Court, Kernersville, 27284. I thought of one other thing I had marked down, and that's to do with the drinking. I mean, bar owners today are responsible for patrons, and, you know, if they serve too much and the people drive drunk, get in an accident, they can be held responsible. I don't want this to turn into a drinking wagon where they're going pub to pub drinking and they're telling the bartender, you know, we got a ride, we're cool to drink, and then this golf cart takes everybody back to their vehicle and they get in it drunk and drive home. I just think we need to look at how the state laws might apply to this and how it applies to the bars today.
Good point. Councilman Burke.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I was going to say that what we heard, Mr. Thiel and all, we need to study this very carefully and make sure before we step out into this venture that we are sure and it's on the right track. It will create more problems if we move so quick and get so excited without thinking it through carefully.
Councilman Montgomery.
Just one thing I'd add, and to the city attorney as she looks to this and others as you look at it, and I understand, as I said, we want to be very diligent in this process. The only thing I do caution us is in this process of looking at it, and we compare a lot, and I think it should be compared, in my opinion, to taxi in the sense in how we do that for hire. But if we have no authority now, if the point we get to, if we put certain things in aesthetics on the golf carts, then we need to come back and do the same thing on a taxi cab, because in my opinion they're so similar that if you place that on one, then I think you need to place that same restriction onto another and not choosing that, because in my opinion, if I have if I want to go get a 1972 broke up car and decide I'm gonna be a taxi cab driver and I pass the inspections, and I get my permit and I'm driving it, although it doesn't look nice to everybody, I'm meeting the standard. So that's just the balance, I think, in looking at it. I wouldn't necessarily say I would want to ride in that, but just making sure we're being consistent on both sides.
That's good.
Thank you for all of your comments. We will hold this item in committee. We will be efficient, we will be patient, and we will be deliberate. Item G2.
Discussion of ordinance amending Chapter 42 entitled Motor Vehicles and Traffic and Chapter 74 of the City Code entitled Streets and Sidewalks, Skateboarding.
Attorney Carmen is recognized.
This item is for discussion only as well. The purpose of this skateboard ordinance is basically, I guess the primary purpose is to extend the prohibition on skateboarding and related activities that now appears in the central business district to our historic districts which include the West End Historic Overlay District, Old Salem, and Bethabara, as well as the Piedmont Triad Research Park, now Wake Forest Innovation Quarter. So basically, right now, the prohibition on skateboards and coasters and roller skates that exist in the Central Business District would be extended to those additional areas. That's captured in Section 2 of the ordinance. Also, you'll notice in Section 1 of the ordinance, Section 42-14, which has been on the books for a while, but in checking for violations and citations issued by the police department, in 20-plus years, this ordinance has only been cited twice. And from a practical standpoint, I'm not sure that it's reasonable. This ordinance, when you read it, prohibits skates, coasters, sleds, and the like on the paved portions of our roadway, the improved roadway surface. And as we all know, there are a number of neighborhoods that don't have sidewalks, and so it's easier for the kids to skate in the street. Also, during the winter time, this past winter, in fact, I'm sure you found a number of kids sledding, but they were sledding in the street. I mean, you don't use sidewalks for that purpose. So it's an ordinance that's probably antiquated. Right now, I have a proposal to strike it. It could be, instead of striking the ordinance, we could come back with some modifications that would allow maybe skateboarding, sledding, roller skating in the street, provided you have helmets, knee pads, elbow pads, something like that, to maybe bring it up to date. But right now, it appears to be antiquated. So that's for discussion in terms of whether or not you want to address that issue as well. Then the third change brought about by this draft ordinance amendment deals with making a technical correction. Right now, or it used to be that we had block parties in which kids could play in the street during the course of a block party. Since we now no longer have block parties, we have special events and parades. The exception now would apply to you can play in the street during the course of a parade that's set forth in the parade, or during the course of a special event that's provided for in the special event. So this is just a technical correction. The reference to a block party is basically incorrect, as now should be a special event or a parade where you can play in the street. So that third correction is just technical. So the meat of the ordinance is basically the first section and then the second section. I don't know if Councilmember McIntosh might want to add something to the discussion or not.
Councilmember McIntosh is recognized.
I did bring this subject up because I had been getting quite a few calls from people in the West End with skaters coming down, particularly for Scythe Street. There are some streets in the West End that are very, very steep, which makes them very appealing to skaters. And I'll admit here that I was a skateboarder in my youth, so I mean I understand sort of the thrill aspect of it, but this, from a safety standpoint, West End in particular is just not suited for a combination of vehicular traffic and skateboarders. And I've spoken with a couple of the skaters, and there really isn't a whole lot the police can say to them because it's legal to do that as of right now, or at least it's a gray enough area that they feel like they're allowed to do that. So it's not a good spot to be skating. I do think that we have, on the flip side of this, we have an obligation to provide a spot for kids to skate because kids are going to skate, and we may as well offer them a much safer place to do that. But there was also back and forth about locations to limit this to, and it appears as if, to me, that this is a good balance. I don't think the entire city of Winston-Salem needs to be off limits to this. I think we're talking about areas that are fairly specific reasons for having them be off limits, and at least in my way of looking at it, these are appropriate areas to have off limits.
Thank you, sir. Councilmember Light. Mayor Pro Tem.
I defy the skateboarders to come do that on the sidewalks of Old Salem. Not even the best skateboarders wouldn't be able to. But the thing about this that sort of troubles me is, I mean, there were no skateboards when I was a kid, but we rode our bicycles in the streets around the neighborhood and everything. And this is sort of telling kids, no, you've got to go somewhere else to do this. So I have a little bit of anxiety about that. Someone make me feel better.
You wouldn't let your kids on Forsyth Street with a skateboard?
No, not on Forsyth Street, no.
Mayor Pro Tem Burke.
I was going to say, please go back and get the history about skateboards. We back years. This is what we were talking about. But you said there's not been many things happening. But I want to tell you, sometimes when I'm going home, some people are skateboarding down New Walkertown Road, right in the middle. And also, when we go down 5th Street, coming to City Hall, they are skateboarding, and they get right in that middle lane, and just skateboard, which is bad because it's night times a lot of times, and you can't see them. So I think we should just be a little more cautious about it. And I know people need freedom of going places, Councilmember Light, but it seemed to me like they're getting real bold with the skateboarding.
Yes.
And I'm thinking about the safety part for them.
Councilmember Montgomery.
My comments are more so actually along the lines of Councilmember Light's, in the sense that this is kind of one of those things that makes me twitch a little bit, in the sense of, I understand the safety piece, and I don't think you should be skateboarding in the middle of any road. But if you say skateboarding, and it goes back to me about bicycles, what about segways? If you can segue on the sidewalk, then why can't I have my skateboard on the sidewalk downtown? That to me just kind of, that's one person's leisure, and then my skateboard. I don't skateboard, but that to me it's a sense of, that's a piece of leisure, and we allow you to have that segue on that same sidewalk or that same place. Then what's the difference? And to me, those are, I understand you can probably stop a little bit easier on the Segway than you can on the on the skateboard, but just that balance. Again, there's a sense of that doesn't seem balanced, because I know there'd be another population of people, if you told them they couldn't do Segway, we'd close down the whole business. So,
Yeah.
Councilmember Adams.
Yes, I guess we're on the side of the twitch today. I have some concerns about selecting certain parts of our city to enforce an ordinance that's applicable to them, that they can't. I know it's safety, but I also think it sends a bad message, because these neighborhoods would send a message to others that these were selective neighborhoods. And we got enough issues right now with the diversity and synergy of our city, what we're trying to build up. I have often, in conversation with the city manager, as you see here, said that we need a skate park in Winston, and right now the fairground is the one that we're looking at, to give them some choices. But I think if no one, I know we're trying to be proactive, but I feel like if nobody's been hit or maimed or killed to the point that we need to do this, I'm not in support of this. I'm just not.
We'll bring it on around. Mayor Pro Tem, this is getting interesting.
Now, I remember when we had not wanting youth to walk downtown. And it was certain youth that was not to go downtown. So then we decided we'd go to the fairgrounds. Went to the fairgrounds, and I want to tell you, it was a disgrace, because it looked like the police were there. My son said, don't call them billy sticks anymore. They got something else to use, more mortar. You know what the police use now. Yes. But they were walking just like, and Wanda said, Councilman Marshall said to me, she said, I know, Vivian, you won't, but this just looks bad. So we took them, and we just said we'll find a way that they could go downtown. They could use it. So I don't know what it will create, because it may give the impression it's okay to be in some parts, but not in some other parts. So it's debatable. Go back and look at them different minutes.
Councilmember McIntyre.
I find it very hard to say, let's wait till an accident happens before we set a rule. I know of several disasters in the city that we had lots of conversation about beforehand, and nothing was done, and people died. Specifically in the West End, we've got a terrain there that is different than just about any other place in Winston-Salem. The rate of drop from West 4th Street down to West End Boulevard, down to Sunset Boulevard, is extremely steep. And whether we want to say that's we're singling out areas of the city over over other areas. That area is not safe to be on a skateboard. Skateboards and cars do not mix on that street, and it's only a matter of time before somebody gets hit. And it's not the only one. I mean, West End in general is fairly steep. We've already said that the Central Business District is off limits to skateboarders. So the precedent is set. I really do not want to wait until somebody's hurt before we act. And I think we're heading in that direction.
Councilmember Bessie.
Just a thought. The West End, I do think has legitimate, unusual terrain issues there, and it might be a reasonable approach to look at an ordinance that at this point simply added the West End historic overlay to the Central Business District as a place where the skateboarding wasn't allowed for, and that would, in essence, be a shorthand way of addressing that particular terrain problem there. I would not be in favor of taking the restriction citywide. I think it's overly restrictive. I agree with the folks. I remember I did not skateboard because my balance wasn't that good. Instead, I was with the kids who did the homemade non-motorized go-karts, and I remember taking one up to the top of the tallest hill in my neighborhood, and I made it halfway down. But I would go slow on the expansion, perhaps look at one that just dealt with the specific problem of that unusually severe terrain in the West End district.
Madam City Attorney.
I think we also need to consider Old Salem. As Councilmember Light mentioned, some of the sidewalks in Old Salem you can barely, unfortunately, walk on. So I would say if you're going to limit it to just West End, you also consider Old Salem.
Councilmember Montgomery.
It's one. I'll start by the beginning of it in terms of looking at skating and those who I've seen skating and skateboarding. I have not seen them personally, in my opinion, with their parents standing up at the top saying, "Hey, we're here to skateboard." But there are individuals, most of the time younger individuals who are by themselves and are going skateboarding. And so to me, even in putting an ordinance saying that you can't skateboard in West End, if I want to go skateboard in West End, unless you have a police officer standing there 24 hours a day, I don't see how that's going to stop somebody from skateboarding down here, even though it's dangerous, even though I think that you will get to the place where there are people who are there, and maybe it'll help in that process. I don't know if we look at it like we did with the parking on the lawn thing, where it's more so the neighborhood says, hey, this is something we want to do, even though it's something, again, for me, when it's a public right-of-way or public sidewalk on that thing, to me, that, hey, my mom and dad paid taxes, or they want me to come in and be able to do this here, that just kind of plays differently for me. And for me, in terms of adding places, in my opinion, looking at it, I say it would take away some places. I think in terms of looking in Central Business District and other places you want to add, hey, I want to go, this ain't adding Innovation Quarter. What if I want to skateboard down the Research Parkway on the sidewalk there? We have a group of people now going out there and enjoying the wildlife that's there, but that may be short-lived as development happens. But still, the point I'm making is I understand the concern, and I'm with you in terms of wanting to do something before somebody gets hurt. I don't think you wait to that side, but it's a how. It's more of a question to me, a how. And I don't know if just saying we do this, just know how you get there. Because at the end of the day, if it's younger individuals who are doing this, that's more of a parental requirement. You can write all the laws you want to on that side. If that's not there, then I don't think you're going to make that impact. And so for me, I think neighborhoods get to a place where they want to say that, and you have that in the West End or Old Salem or someplace where they make that determination. I think that may be something that I think we should consider in that sense, maybe in that process. And I don't know if we can do that like we did with the parking on the line, but I think that may reach a balance to be able to have more central support.
What it sounds like from the general consensus that I'm getting is that most council members feel as if a blanket ordinance might be out of the question at this point. But however, I've heard the term for the day, pilot project. Maybe there's the potential to look at excluding or including certain neighborhoods based on that neighborhood's petition, the same way we did with the no parking on the front line ordinance. Whether we agree with it or not, it's an option, and I think in order to continue to move forward, you've got to have options on the table. Councilmember Adams.
Basically saying what you're saying, you need to start with slow, Councilmember Bessie. This is kind of overreaching, and we need to do that. I don't have a problem with starting with one area, but I also think we need to move fast forward on the skate park and see the results by the end of summer, what we do, how we market it, how we get the young folks up there to do this. And as Councilmember Burke said, we don't need 50 million police up there. We just need to treat it what it is. It's a park. And then we can come back with it. But I think, to just do a blanket on all of these neighborhoods, I don't agree with that.
Well, one way is to regulate things, and one way is to allow it in certain areas. Mr. City Manager, let's talk about what the city may do.
Well, I thought about one other possibility. We'd have to research it. Is what if we tried to regulate or prohibit it, not in a specific neighborhood, but in specific situations? So, if the grade of the street is more than, I don't know, a certain degree, so it's steep hills.
Like a step.
What if we prohibited it at night, so it was only during safety, and we prohibited on roads that had a speed limit more than 35 miles an hour to keep them off New Walkertown and things like that, to try to regulate a little more so that kids can skateboard in neighborhoods, but not where there's as much safety issues or a really high grade. I don't know if it's
that's a good idea. In fact, Councilmember Light.
In effect, though, that sort of thing and what we've been talking about just totally goes against the mindset of a skateboarder. You can't be careful on a skateboard.
You're going to give me the measurements now.
I mean, you just can't. The whole thing is being a daredevil. So I'm not sure the message would get across. Although we could, have no skateboarding at night or whatever, but
we'd end up enforcing it on a complaint basis only. So when somebody calls, because that's all you can do.
Councilmember McIntosh.
I want to sort of dispel any opinion here that we're talking about 10 and 12-year-olds whose mom is standing there watching them skateboard. I mean, we're talking about a youth culture that's young teens to late teens, maybe even early 20s. So this is a thrill ride. This is a daredevil group, no doubt. And in terms of blanketing neighborhoods, we're really talking about 3 neighborhoods, one of which there isn't a problem now in Old Salem because it's too rough to ride. Although if we got any skaters watching this, I'm sure there'll be people out pushing that tomorrow or tonight.
Oh, they do in the parking lot across the street.
So I mean, from a geography standpoint, I don't think we're affecting a whole lot of turf in Winston, and I do think that there are specific reasons in these 3 areas that we're talking about adding that make sense.
Yeah. Councilmember Bessie, and we'll start to wrapping up the conversation.
I understand. I respect Mr. Garrity's trying to come up with a compromise approach. I would be concerned about trying to use that approach, however, because it makes application more difficult. And one of the things that I'm interested in avoiding is having a lot of police time, burned in response to, there's somebody out skating on my street, and by the time, of course, they get there, it's gone. So, that's why I'd rather not try that particular approach at this point.
Well, another good point, Mr. Manager. As we continue to conclude, if you could just touch very briefly on what we're doing as a city to allow opportunities for skateboarders who want to participate in their sport.
Thank you, Chairman Taylor. We have a joint project between the Fairgrounds and the Recreation and Parks Department. We have purchased what's called portable skateboard equipment, ramps and jumps. And during the month of July, the entire month of July, we're going to advertise it, the education building, as a skateboard park. We're also going to have a few BMX, the small bicycles you see, they can also use that. We'll have some exhibitions. But the month of July, we will have, every day of the week, we will have the skateboard park there. based on the usage and the demand, we can't keep it in the education building because we have other events. But our thought is to look at some other site after that in the community where we could install it outside permanently. Perhaps one of our tennis courts, which is no longer used, that could be repurposed at a park. But we are excited. We're going to promote it a lot in June for the young people and adults to come skateboard.
All right. We will continue to keep all of these comments into perspective. We'll hold this item in committee. Mr. Manager and city staff, we ask that you consider all of the comments and the alternatives that have been brought to the table, and I believe this item will come back to us again in a month or so for conversation. Item G3, last item.
Report on reduction of medical calls.
As we mentioned earlier, we have our fire chief, Chief Tony Farmer, who is here with us today. Chief Farmer, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'd like to say good evening to the committee chair, committee members,
Good evening.
management. Tonight we're continuing to report on medical call reduction. We'll cover 4 brief items tonight. We'll talk about the April reduction efforts. We'll also talk about some communication efforts between county, EMS, and fire. We'll talk about a little bit about duplication of services, and we also took a directive from you last month to take a first look or an initial look at what it would require for the city to get into delivering medical call response. First of all, briefly, during the month of April, as you look at the figures, you see that we had a total of 1,375 calls that were requested, and the department responded to 984. There were 391 calls that were filtered out after it went through our process. And so the reduction basically compared to last year, if you look at the second set of bullets, last year we responded to virtually 1,500 calls, and this year we again, for this month, we've reduced it down to 984 calls. And so, of course, if you look at that from a graph perspective, the last set of bars, you can see last year it was 1,532, and this year in April we responded to 984 calls, and that is about a 36% decrease in department responding to medical calls. And so April, we're back on track compared to where we were the first quarter of the year. We were looking at between 900 and 1,000 calls based on our reduction efforts. As we concluded last month, we basically have a few ongoing directives. One, we're looking at continuing to work with EMS in terms of determining what we can do to continue in our triaging of medical calls and addressing the issues and concerns from both sides. Management is also working with county to see if there was any change or any type of further discussion in terms of collecting the stipend. We also looked at how to eliminate duplication, and we also continuing to look at what it would again take to get into the EMS business. First of all, in lieu of communications, we met with the county EMS fire staff and EMS staff, and we basically had some discussion about what is happening in terms of triaging calls, basically call taking in, sending information over to the city dispatchers, and then dispatching fire units. And basically we determined from that discussion that there has not been a lot of exchange of information from the county comm center to city fire. Basically, when they're called, they'll basically say we need a fire truck, and from there they put it in one of our categories, and if it doesn't fit the category, they don't get a dispatch. If it does, they get a dispatch. Certainly, we concluded that there's a lot of work that can be done there, and I really like to say that this was the first month we've had the type of dialogue and interaction that we have where both sides actually started collaborating, talking about what we can do with the information to make response better. So what actually occurred from that meeting was, one, we decided to take a look at the APCO or the dispatch protocol and look at how we could build more of that into our dispatch protocol to help get the calls dispatch where we have need or where there might be someone in need. And we need that communication from county so that our dispatchers can get that information and use their information to make decisions. So that was a great communication between county fire and, city fire and EMS. Couple of examples of calls. We had a call last month where an EMS unit was traveling from the county transporting a patient, and we got a call to dispatch to meet them to, I guess, to get one of our people to ride in with them. We rarely, if ever, get that kind of call, and the comm center was struggling to deal with that. And then when there was not a good share of information, meaning what is going on with the patient, there was no way to triage the list. So we looked at that call as a team, county EMS and fire, said, what could we have done to make that better? And one of the key answers was supply information. You know, what was going on with the patient, what was happening. When you use terms like he's going downhill, that's not on the list, and it's hard for them to filter out that kind of information to tie it to getting a dispatch. So we had a great discussion and dialogue to help help get that information to our dispatchers so that they can indeed determine to dispatch a unit. We had a couple of other calls where people were having breathing difficulties, and the same thing, if you ask for a truck and say, you've got a medical call, you send us a truck, we've got a patient in respiratory failure or choking. If it meets the criteria, you get a dispatch, but if it doesn't, then we need that extra information. It's really based in the beginning on giving the operator enough information so they can make some decisions based on the list. So we made a lot of headway there, and I think that was very, very positive for the month. So we looked at working on the communications. Dan Osmick from county is working with county EMS to make sure they're transferring information, and we're working with operators to make sure that they can use that information and make decisions. We also talked about sharing operators. You know, let the people from from public safety communication go to county communication and see what's going on to get a feel for the nature of the calls so they can, again, work better on receiving and dealing with that information. So during this month, there was a lot of positive feedback, and again, it was the first time, as Dan said, we actually collaborated and worked toward meeting both agencies' goals. So we feel that was positive, and I think right now we're on a good movement toward bringing about reduction and considering the needs of both departments or both agencies. So it was a good month for communication and for moving forward with our reduction. We talked a little bit about duplication of services. There was an example given by one of the EMS persons at the meeting, said there's no need for fire to sort of be involved initially on diabetic calls. Maybe we could place a EMS unit at a fire station or in a fire station. So if they're there, the fire truck wouldn't even have to go unless there's a further need for a more serious type of incident or tied to that call, such as a person needing CPR or something like that. So again, you can see this dialogue, this communication is really starting to push us forward to exploring ways to make the reduction work more. We talked about what our real objectives were. Obviously, this year we talked about a 40% reduction, which is about 14,000 calls, and we're actually talking about potentially getting all the way down to 10,000 if we look at all these ways that we can actually lower that response for city fire as we work together as an agency. Last month, one of the council members asked how many calls do we have where we have people that we go to all the time, repeated responses. And we noted that there were about 16 of those addresses and potentially up to 10 times per month for each one of those. So you can see how exponentially those numbers can grow into added responses. But again, those are things that we said as two agencies working together, those are things we can work on. We also talked about, can we place people, pull people out of the units when we have extra people and try to build units so we can respond to the busiest areas. And that was a good suggestion, but it's really tough for both agencies because we operate at minimum all the time. And so we could only do that when we have full staffing, and full staffing doesn't happen much of the time during the year. But it's still, we're talking about options, so our reduction really is moving forward in terms of collaborations. And certainly, finally, we talked about what you directed us to do. We looked at taking over EMS, city fire, the attorney's office, and budget met with the state representative, Eddie Jordan. He came to talk to us about what it would take for us to deliver emergency medical services as a city. Basically, when you look at what the EMS or the county provides, They basically provide emergency services. There's paramedic level care on routine. They have also transport people that are not really emergency, but from one emergency medical center to another. And there are critical transfers from one center to another. So that's sort of a conglomerate of what EMS actually does generally. And so for us, we'd be looking more at the emergency side of that. But certainly when you look at the entire service, that is what you would be looking at in terms of the city delivering a medical service as a city. Then when you start looking at what is required for us to do that, these bullet points basically illustrate what those requirements typically would be. We'd have to have paramedics trained. Basically, it would require us to contract someone to train them, or we ourselves establish a way to train them, as well as some agreements with the hospitals for clinical training. We would have to potentially add EMT personnel to support adding teams of people when we would start putting ambulances into services. We would also have to look at purchasing equipment for the trucks, ambulances themselves, and certainly we would have to look at potentially where we would place these vehicles, whether we would add on to our own buildings, place them in our current houses, and that kind of thing now. So you can see that it grows in terms of what it would be we require to get even started in the business of supplying it. Also, some support services that would be necessary. We would have to have a medical director, and we would basically still fall upon the county's direction. Dr. Alston is the medical director now, and so certainly we would fall up under his jurisdiction. And we could also have a person that would be directly working with us as a medical director, but they would still be working with the county medical director. Then you're looking at adding administrative staff potentially to help oversee the service, field supervision, training, again, certification training and ongoing continuing education training, quality assurance, opportunity to take a look at the business and see actually what we're doing in terms of effectiveness. And certainly we talk about delivering the service. We would have to train our operators and get them to a place where they could actually receive triage medical information and then dispatch. That requires a certification, and that would have to occur either with all operators, or we would have to make a division of adding people to take care of that service for them. Then you will be looking at billing, the people associated with that, and following through on collections, receivable, and et cetera. And of course, any vehicles we buy, you would have to look at maintaining them and keeping those in service, as well as IT staff and data. So the chronological steps that would need to take place, we would plan that development. The medical director would have to review that here right in the county, and we would have to create a franchise agreement with the county itself, and that would lead to an interlocal agreement of both governments. And then we would have to modify the service plan, basically, that would make the city the prime deliverer of medical services. You would have to approve those changes as you would do any action for service delivery. And then, of course, the bullet areas would mean creating a division within fire to do that, buying that equipment, applying to the state, and then being approved by the state as they would come in and evaluate our resources and what we've done to put that in place. And we also took a look at Greenville. Greenville is a city that does deliver EMS services. They transport as well as provide the other services that we talked about earlier. They've been in this business for 20 years or more. They currently have 8 ambulances that they use on the streets, and they also have 1 truck that can actually transport. They said that they bill about $3 million annually, and we didn't go into a lot of details because we figured that would be the next step if you so direct us. But that includes what they collect in terms of transports and what they can bill for in terms of medical services. They said they basically collect about 73% of their collections in lieu of contract, Medicaid, Medicare, and those kinds of things, and about 50% for other collections. So there are other agencies that can do that, and I note that Greenville is about roughly 30 square miles, and so these are basically the resources they use to deliver that within Greenville, which is in Pitt County. And so in summary, our medical reduction is still working, And again, this month was a very positive month. After 11 months of working with EMS, we finally get to a place where we're collaborating and working together to meet reduction efforts for the city and to meet efforts for county dispatch. I would recommend that we would continue those reduction efforts. We have more cooperation now. We note that if we would indeed get into starting response for ourselves, there's a significant startup cost for that. We would be under the direction of the present medical director, which is Dr. Alston, and we'd probably be looking at a 2 to 3 year process of getting this in place in terms of starting the next surveys of standards of cover, determining what buildings would be, and all the support information and criteria we would need to get started in terms of delivering the services. That's all we have for tonight. You have any questions regarding anything from the report?
Thank you, Chief, for your presentation. I know this committee and those who are at the round table wanted to keep a very close eye on this particular subject, so we thank you for, and the city manager and all the staff for doing the due diligence and bringing us back a detailed report. And for what I'm seeing, the negotiations with the county, the concept of maybe taking on EMS is still on the table, and we're still evaluating both of those details as we move forward. Is that correct, Chief?
Yes, sir. We can continue to do that. The next step will probably be to start looking at the real hardcore, how do we get started? Looking at what the state recommends, looking at the response data to determine what we would need to deliver EMS in our city.
Thank you, sir. We'll go around the table. Councilmember Light.
It's never made a whole lot of sense to me to send a fire truck out to, an emergency, a medical emergency. Has it ever been thought of turning this whole thing around and letting the EMS handle all calls, and have the county service the whole county, including within the city?
Chief?
Has that ever been?
But technically, the delivery of medical service is the county's area.
Yeah.
They are the ones that are responsible for that within this jurisdiction. Back when the city or city fire got into this, we started by just responding to cardio and respiratory calls, and we were very limited based on using the defill machine. And so it has grown, but we started as a limited provider, and it has grown to that point. So it started from EMS to actually being the full deliverer of that service.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that just seems like that makes more sense to me.
The county, I've had conversations with the county manager about this issue. I mean, if we could choose, I wouldn't recommend it, but we could choose to stop going it all altogether. What the county would do at this point probably would be, what they've told me is they would work to try to reestablish the volunteer rescue squads that used to, many years ago, answer these kind of calls. So I know the county would have a challenge financially to step up their service delivery to assume the same response that we do right now.
The volunteer rescue squads would get roughly $75,000 to perform their duties.
I'm not sure what they would pay the rescue squads. What the county pays a standby to the volunteer fire departments who answer medical calls in the county outside the city limits. They pay them roughly $3,000 to $4,000 per station. What they equated that to for the city, based on the number of stations we have, was $75,000 a year.
Thank you, sir. Have your questions been satisfied, Councilmember Light?
Thank you.
Councilmember Adams.
Thank you. I would be interested, I know you have some figures plugged in, and I know you might not want to spend too much time on this, but I would like to see it at some point. A budget plan with an income side and an expenditure side of how many new employees we would have to bring on, how much training we would have to do, how much we would have to invest to make this happen. I know last year when EMTs were called, 911 for me, and when I got the bill that the insurance companies don't pay for, nobody told me that, it was $600 and some. So I would be interested to see, again, the income and the revenue side of this. and the expenditure side. I know back in the day when I was growing up in the city in the 60s, the funeral homes in the black community were responsible for as EMTs for us. And this went on until I don't know when, 70s maybe, I don't know. But every funeral home in the inner city in the black community had an ambulance, as we called them back then. And they were known for their colors, not necessarily the funeral home. Gilmore's was the red and white. Russell's had a color, I think it was gold and white, and some other Ryans or somebody had green and white. But it is interesting to see where we have come to now. I think we need to look at this seriously as to taking on city manager, whether it would be, I know it's hard for people to hear it this way, but as a business, how much would this bring to us since we're doing it anyway, as Councilmember Light and all of us know? How much would it, we could...
We can prepare that for you, Councilmember Adams. I can tell you we looked at the county's books. They do not make money on it. They lose money. It would take us, and we'll get you more details, but it would take us several years to even come close to breaking even all our startup costs. One item we didn't even list there is the insurance costs. There's quite a bit of that liability cost associated with this as well, but we can provide a much more detailed report on it.
And also find out, just like what Chief said, with healthcare the way it is right now, and with the boomers numbers, we're old, we're getting old, and we need EMT. If there's some partnerships we can establish with some of these healthcare providers and insurance companies to help us with that.
And I'm going to be so brave as to throw out a number, which I know that I should not, but based on my research, it's my understanding that it may take us a little bit over $4 million to get into the game. And I believe that Greenville, North Carolina, has been able to turn a profit. But based on the county's books, there is no guarantee that will be the case. And I won't ask any of the staff to say anything. It's just based on my research and what I've heard. Councilman Burr.
A couple of comments. One, regarding the level of service that we're attempting to deliver now, I think it's a good thing. The concept is to get faster response to the most severe level of medical emergencies in the cities. It's a public safety service that we provide to our citizens. It's a benefit. If you live in the city, you can expect a faster response if you've got a cardiorespiratory kind of critical level of medical emergency. And I would like to see us continue to do that and continue to try to push out the more routine calls that can wait those extra couple of minutes for the EMS response. Based on what I've heard today, I'm reluctant to spend a lot of our resources working on a plan to get into the comprehensive EMS provision within the city. It sounds like it would be a resource drain and not really to the benefit of the citizens. So I am supportive of the current direction of efforts to maintain our response to those most critical, time-critical emergency responses in the city, but not to move toward trying to take over the whole shebang.
And I think there were, thank you, Councilmember Best, I think there were 4 options, and these are just some of the options that we decided to evaluate. But for those who may be listening, the bottom line is we've heard from the chief and some members of the fire department who are concerned that their number one job is firefighting, fire suppression, and several other things within their purview, and they've been taking away from what it is that they've been charged to do because they're responding to medical calls. So we have to find a way to keep our citizens safe when it comes to firefighting and fire suppression, but also keep them safe when it comes to emergency management services. So we're just discussing it, trying to find out what the best course may be. Madam City Attorney.
I was just going to mention, in terms of taking on the service in the city in its entirety, that the county's approval is critical to that process, number one. And number two, in terms of the fees that could be charged, those fees would be limited pursuant to the franchise agreement, as well. So those are two things to keep in mind. County approval, critical fees may be limited pursuant to the franchise agreement.
We'll go to Mr. City Manager, and then we come to Mr. McIntyre.
I just wanted to let the committee know that Dr. Austin is here, and I believe he did request to have an opportunity to speak to the committee.
Dr. Austin, before we recognize you, and we definitely want to hear from you, Councilmember McIntosh, did you want to make a few comments?
Yeah, I just want to make some comments. I mean, it seems like what we're talking about here to a great degree is efficiencies. Sending a fire truck to an ambulance call doesn't seem like a real efficient thing to do. But we're also talking about fair compensation for the services that we're providing, and I don't think there's a sense that we're getting fair compensation for what we're doing. But it's also interesting to see that negotiations have gotten a little bit better since this discussion has started. So I think we need to continue to push on that, because I think there are inefficiencies, and I think we've got good staffs on both sides, and I think if we continue to wring it out and being mindful of the quality of care, that we can push this along a lot further.
All right. Mr. Austin, it's my understanding that you wish to be heard. When you come forward, if you just give your name and your address for the record, please.
Good evening, Dr. Roy Olson. I am a resident of the city of Winston-Salem. I live at 162 Hunters Ridge Road. I am the medical director for Forsyth County EMS, and by state rule and law, the medical director for all the EMS responders, both first responders and EMS, and even the private convalescent services that we have. As I have listened to discussion, I feel that my first step is actually to educate this committee on how EMS works in this city and also in many areas of the country. The majority of systems operate like we do, a tiered response. You have first responders, usually fire-based, that are dispatched to emergencies, and we'll come back how we determine emergency, and then an ambulance is dispatched. We have moved from the era when we had the volunteer rescue squads as first responders, and they went on every call. If somebody dialed 911, you got a single response. Everybody came, lights and siren, a cast of thousands, even for your stub toe. Inefficient use of resources, and quite frankly, every time you go down the street, lights and siren. You put the crew at risk, you put the citizens at risk. The majority of line of duty deaths for EMS and law enforcement and fire are vehicle accidents. And so anything you can do to reduce that risk is good, as well as efficient use of resources. For over 15 years, our agency has used the concept of priority dispatch, meaning a call for service is received, a series of questions are asked. Those questions are scripted and designed to identify what are life-threatening emergencies versus non-life-threatening calls. Calls that are non-life-threatening get an ambulance. If they're very routine, it's actually turned over to one of the private providers, okay, who operate under franchise. If it is an emergency, the closest available first responder is sent, followed by an advanced life support ambulance. This is the way we have been working this for over 15 years. So contrary to the 2012 report that you received, that the city goes on every ambulance call and should only go on emergencies, the city fire department is dispatched by Forsyth County Communications on calls that are identified as emergencies. These are identified using a nationally accepted standard protocol and series of questions that we utilize in our county. There are two major producers of these, the National Association for Emergency Services Dispatch and APCO. We use the APCO because we have a little more flexibility. If we were using the other one, we'd be spending more for the service and have to send the fire department on more calls. The net result is that sometimes when you get there, it turns out it really wasn't a big emergency. Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, which if you get into the ambulance business, you will get to know very well, defines an emergency as an event that occurs that a reasonable individual would think that these signs and symptoms would suggest there's an event that is potentially dangerous to life or health. So when somebody picks up the phone and says, I'm having trouble breathing, or does it and barely getting the words out, that's a pretty serious thing. We respond, we send the first responders. Sometimes we get there and they've taken their inhaler and they're better. Turns out we weren't necessarily needed. Sometimes we arrive, we give them the treatment, and then they refuse care. Those are all calls that you don't get reimbursed for, by the way. The way the government works right now, you only get paid as a taxi. If you transport them to the hospital, you get paid. But if we run a cardiac arrest on the scene and pronounce a patient, do you know what we get from Medicare and Medicaid? Nothing. Okay? So understand that going into the ambulance business is very tricky waters. But that being said, our purpose as an agency is to take care of all the citizens of this county. We have a series of protocols and guidelines that determine dispatch for emergencies. The city fire department has seen fit to change those guidelines, and I would say, unless I'm not aware, have not been reviewed by a physician or a medical professional that is familiar with EMS. I have not signed off on them, ladies and gentlemen, as the medical director, because we've been using the protocols that I have reviewed and approved. And I do that every other year when we go through the set. We're beginning the process again. The chief is right. It dropped from about 1,500 to 1,300 before the calls because we have revised the protocols. Perhaps not as much as meets the need of the city, and we're continuing to work. As the chief said, this month has been very productive in the discussions between the agencies, and we continue to look forward in collaborating with them. But ultimately, as the medical director of this entire county, which includes the city of Winston-Salem, my first responsibility is to the citizens and to assure that they receive the best possible care. On the whole, they do. We have a phenomenal system. I get to travel all around this country and the world lecturing on EMS and disaster management, and we have a phenomenal system in this county, this city, and this state. When you go elsewhere, you would not believe the amount of infighting and posturing that you see. We are all focused on that one mission of caring for the citizens. I think that to go back right now for the county to take over and start having to do first responder city, I'm sure we'll find a way to do it. EMS is known for adapting and dealing with it. But the reality is, in the majority of cities in our state, first responder service is provided by the fire service. This is something that they do. They actually respond. I can produce the numbers. I think Mr. Osmick shared with you on probably more types of calls than we are currently have on the city list. And this is because they are following the, priority dispatch, which is a commercial firm guidelines, which are more restrictive than ours. So that, in a nutshell, is where we are from my point of view as the medical director. I will be very glad to take your questions. I am very glad to remain an asset to provide information to you, just as I work with all the first responders and EMS personnel in this county.
Mr. Austin, we appreciate you taking the time to educate us on how things work for the county. Does anybody have any questions? Or while we have and we thank you for being here today. Anybody have any questions for Mr. Austin?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Austin.
Thank you.
Mr. City Manager, this was just for informational purposes, and I understand that we'll continue negotiations with the county. Do you want to be heard before we close this item out?
I would just reiterate what both the chief and Dr. Austin said. The meetings this month were the most productive we've had. Lots of creativity on both sides. The county broached the subject of, as the chief mentioned, of putting ambulances in our stations and jointly working together. I think that is the way to move forward, is how we can address efficiencies together, and I'm very hopeful that we will continue down that line.
Thank you. Did I see your hand, sir? Councilman Montgomery.
Just a comment in looking at this, and I'm sure that the city manager has been in conversation, dialogue, as he said, with the county, with county manager. And just again look forward to additional conversations we can have with that. And it just continues to amaze me how much the city of Winston-Salem is in the county of Forsyth when it comes to other things, but it's not when it comes to many other things that's there and how we deal. And I think it's important as elected officials, not just here but even on the county level, I think for us to have dialogue with the other elected officials that are there so that they understand the perspective that we have here, because I think some of that is just perspective, and I think if we have some dialogue with them, I'd urge council members to just have some dialogue with other county commissioners and others, just to share the sentiment of perspective where we're coming from, so that they understand that from an elected perspective as well.
And one last item to point out, that all of our duties are to look after the safety and the well-being of the citizens that we represent, and I'm glad we're able to do that collectively. Mr. City Manager, I guess our directive to you, as it has been before, is to make sure that we get fair compensation for services rendered.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions or concerns? Anything else for the good of the order? If not, we'll consider this meeting to be adjourned. Thank you.
It's to you to try it.